If you're feeling bogged down by the impossible expectations or the noise of new year, new me, take a second to pause. Grow Therapy gives you space to slow down, check in, and start the new year from a more grounded place. Whether it's your first time in therapy or your 50th, Grow makes it easier to find a therapist who fits you, not the other way around. They connect you with thousands of independent licensed therapists across the U.S., offering both virtual and in-person sessions, nights and weekends. You can search by what matters, like insurance, specialty, identity, or availability, and get started in as little as 2 days. And if something comes up, you can cancel up to 24 hours in advance at no cost. There are no subscriptions, no long-term commitments. You just pay per session. Grow helps you find therapy on your time. Whatever challenges you're facing, Grow Therapy is here to help. Grow accepts over 100 insurance plans, including Medicaid in some states. Sessions average about $21 with insurance, and some pay as little as $0, depending on their plan. Visit growtherapy.com/booknow today to get started. That's growtherapy.com/booknow. growtherapy.com/booknow. Availability and coverage vary by state and insurance plan.
This is episode 115 of That Shakespeare Life. That Shakespeare Life is now available on our very own digital app. This app works on your tablet, phone, or TV and lets you explore the history of William Shakespeare with exclusive content, interviews, and documentaries not available anywhere else. You can cook, dance, and play your way through the life of William Shakespeare, all without any commercials. Find out more at cassidycash.com/experience and stay tuned after the episode for even more details.
Hi, I'm Martha Carlin. I'm a professor of history at the University of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and I'm the author, among other things, of a book called Medieval Southwark. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
I think that he and his contemporaries would have known multiple kinds of citrus fruits and would have made distinctions between them. But I'm sure that people in Shakespeare's day were quite knowledgeable about the differences. And they would have had sour oranges, or what we often refer to today as Seville oranges or bitter oranges, which are not all that often used today because they are quite sour. They're more likely to be used in cooking than common consumption.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
Like so many of Shakespeare's words, even a single line can have an elaborate history. When it comes to the word orange, there is just such a history to be found if you know where to look. For the 16th century, oranges were a staple item for seasonal eating on tables from the average person all the way to the nobility, while the real rage in history for it being fashionable to have orange houses called orangeries in England would not hit in full force until after Shakespeare's lifetime. But the orange, the lemon, and sour oranges were not only in existence during Shakespeare's lifetime, but they show up in his plays. Interestingly, William Shakespeare may not have had the same kind of oranges we use today for our morning orange juice or to buy at a local grocery store. But not only did he have them, there were several different varieties. Here to help us explore where oranges came from, how they arrived in England, and what Shakespeare's talking about when he mentions an orange wife, as well as going to the orange, is our guest, Dorian Fuller. Dorian Fuller is an archaeobotanist that specializes in the history of plants, including oranges. Dorian is professor of archaeobotany at University College London. He works on past agricultural systems and plant domestication through archaeological research in several regions, including sub-Saharan Africa, the Near East, South Asia, and China. He has directed archaeological fieldwork in Sudan, Iraqi Kurdistan, and India. He has carried out archaeological fieldwork in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Thailand, China, Turkey, Iraq, Morocco, Ethiopia, and Sudan, and archaeobotanical laboratory analysis even more widely than that. He co-authored Trees and Woodlands in South India, Archaeological Perspectives, and has published more than 300 articles and chapters. He received a European Research Council Advanced Investigator grant on comparative pathways to agriculture and several major grants from the UK Natural Environment Research Council. See a more complete list of Dorian's latest research and links to where you can learn more about him and his work in the show notes for today's episode. Hello, Dorian. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
During Shakespeare's childhood, William of Orange was the main leader of the Dutch revolt against the Spanish Habsburgs, which would ultimately lead to the 80 Years' War. Orange being the name which was given to this section of the Netherlands over which he was regent. This historical note indicates that linguistically, orange was a word that was well known during Shakespeare's lifetime and in use well before he was born even. But since the climate in Northern Europe is anything but hospitable to things like citrus fruit, I was wondering, Dorian, which came first, the color or the fruit?
Well, it's a slightly complicated question. I mean, in simple terms, the fruit came first because it gives its name to the color. The truth behind the words is that the names and the meanings have a more complex and interesting story because of people mishearing words that sounded similar. So William of Orange takes his name ultimately from the name of a place in southern France, Orange. And its name is actually a very old one that has nothing to do with the fruit. So its name goes back to Roman times, at least, when the place was known as something like Orazio, which is a name that was taken from the name of a local Gallic deity who was venerated locally by one of the Gallic tribes there. And when that region was conquered by Julius Caesar, the Romans called that town after that god, Orazio. So nothing to do with the fruit at all. Now, quite separately from that, the name for the citrus fruit ultimately comes from an Indian name for the fruit. So oranges are very ancient in India, and a Sanskrit name for them is something like naranga, which you will find a similar form in modern Hindi, naranj. That name is then borrowed with the fruit as it spreads west into Persia, and the Persian name is also something like naranj, and that gets borrowed into Arabic, and ultimately from Arabic into Spanish as naranja, and various versions of that today, laranja, etc. This term, which probably referred to sour oranges, would have been established in Spain, in southern Spain, when it was under Arab control, in Andalusia, probably from the 12th century or so. And we know from Arabic sources that oranges were grown around the city of Cordoba already in the 12th century. And so the Spanish would have known naranjas from the 13th century. But if you think of if you want to say one naranja, una naranja in Spanish, it sounds a lot to an English ear like an oranja. And
it really does. Yeah,
you very similar to the place name in southern France, Orange. And so English people hearing these words basically confuse una naranja with an orange, like the place name. So they equated the two and started spelling it as an orange, right? And so the singular is just orange. And so the fruit became equivalent to the French place name. And then, of course, the fruit has a very distinctive color. So that started being used as, the color of oranges is the orange color. So prior to this time, there wasn't a separate term for this color. Most languages don't really separate orange from a kind of light form of red, right? And so this is a new color that comes into the English language. Again, the earliest, as far as I could work out, the earliest Middle English sources that mention the word orange for either for the fruit or the color come from the late 14th century. So prior to Shakespeare's time, these words would have come into the English language.
Classical sources like Pliny the Elder, which Shakespeare uses as a source for some of his plays, makes mention of the citron, meaning the orange. Pliny's references show there was a Roman understanding of oranges, and while that makes sense to me, given Italy's climate being much more hospitable to oranges than England, I wonder, when Shakespeare came across these references, would he have had a personal understanding of what an orange was?
I mean, I think Shakespeare probably would have had a personal understanding of what an orange was, but there still remains some issues around what Pliny actually meant by citron. I mean, it's not clear that the Roman authors really did know oranges. I mean, it's been something that's been debated amongst classicists, I think, for some time. It's clear that they knew citrus fruits. Now, all the citrus fruits are introduced from the East. You know, their origins all lie in parts of India and Southeast Asia and the southernmost bits of China. And they get introduced to the West at various periods. From the archaeological evidence, the first species to arrive in the Mediterranean is what we call in English the citron, which is kind of like the large, bumpy cousin of the lemon. And it's something that doesn't have a lot of flesh. It's used classically medicinally. It's used as a flavoring. Today, you'll find it grown in Greece, and they'll make liquors flavored out of citron and so forth. And that's certainly in the Mediterranean already from the Persian period. And then what comes after that is the lemon. And the lemon is really a hybrid of a citron and a sour orange that arose somewhere in India, or Northeast India or Southeast Asia. Archaeological finds from the site of Pompeii, so where we have wonderful preservation buried by the ash of Mount Vesuvius, have recovered seeds and pollen of both citrons and lemons. So we know that the Romans are growing citrons and lemons. It's not clear that they're actually growing any oranges. So that's an area that's still open for debate. And of course, one of the challenges for the archaeologist is actually telling apart the seeds of these things, because citrus fruits tend to hybridize with each other. So there's a lot of intermediate forms between citrons and sour oranges and lemons, which means morphologically it can be quite tricky to tell their remains apart archaeologically. And of course, archaeologically, we might be dealing with particular hybrid varieties that aren't the same as our modern varieties. So there is some possibility that maybe some form of early orange was present in the Roman world. But what's clear is they had lemons and citrons. But linguistically, of course, different European languages at different times have also confused and transferred these words between different species.
So when we're reading Shakespeare's plays and he's mentioning some of these terms, I've read that 16th century references to the sour oranges that you're talking about were later determined by historians to be describing lemons, but you're making a distinction between these things. Was there a distinction for Shakespeare made between the different types of citrus like pomelo, oranges, limes, and lemons? Or would Shakespeare have been describing, any one of these things and possibly all of these things with references to citrus in general?
I think he would have known that he and his contemporaries would have known multiple kinds of citrus fruits and would have made distinctions between them. I mean, it's certainly true that there would have been fewer varieties known then than we know now. We have global supply chains from all over the world, and we get lots of different varieties of citrus fruits in our grocery stores. They would have had fewer to contend with, but I'm sure that those they had, that people in Shakespeare's day were quite knowledgeable about the differences, and they would have had sour oranges, or what we often refer to today as Seville oranges or bitter oranges, which are not all that often used today because they are quite sour. They're more likely to be used in cooking than common consumption. And so I think that's probably what he would have been referring to. They would have had citrons. These are these large, wrinkly fruit, which today are not particularly common. They're common in parts of China and parts of Greece and Israel, but they're not particularly common fruits anymore. They would have had lemons, and they probably would have also known limes. So Arabic sources suggest that in the Arab world, they started cultivating and making distinctions between lemons and limes from the 13th century or 14th century. And limes, again, are a hybrid between a citron and some other wild citrus fruits that we think arose in Malaysia. And of course, parts of Malaysia become Islamic starting in the 13th century. And so you get new citrus fruits moving into the through the Islamic world into the Mediterranean at that time. It's almost certainly the case that all those were known. True sweet oranges, as we think of oranges in the modern sense, these are the fruits that we consume in huge quantities as orange juice today. They only arrive in Europe around 1500 at the earliest, and they're probably coming back with Portuguese once the Portuguese start exploring the Indian Ocean and reaching South India and maybe parts of the East African coast, Zanzibar, Mombasa, and Kenya. And so Vasco da Gama and the subsequent Portuguese explorers bring back sweet oranges, and it probably takes them a while to catch on. So it's quite likely that in Shakespeare's day, the first sweet orange varieties were known, but they would not have been very common. So he may already even be making that distinction with sour oranges versus sweet oranges, which would have been a new fruit in the markets of Europe.
In Much Ado About Nothing, Beatrice uses the sarcastic phrase civil as an orange, which is a pun on the Seville orange from Seville, Spain, which you alluded to just now. Were oranges primarily imported from Spain in 1598 when Much Ado About Nothing was written?
Yes. I mean, climatically, of course, citrus fruits need these warmer Mediterranean climates. And as I already indicated, southern Spain, especially when it's part of the Islamic world, modern Andalusia and the modern city of Cordoba, those regions were Arabic speaking and part of the under Islamic control in the 12th and 13th century, started growing oranges in particular. And it's still the case that if you look at modern production in Europe, Spain produces more citrus fruits than any other European country. So it would have been a major source for trading these fruits to northern European countries like Britain.
You've mentioned a couple of times the influence of the Islamic religion on the development of hybrid citrus fruits and bringing that into life there. And during the Middle Ages, it was often monks who were responsible for growing and cultivating fruits like oranges, peaches, almonds, and figs. Given the association between oranges and monasteries and religion, was there a spiritual connection applied to citrus during Shakespeare's lifetime?
It's quite possible that in some cases it was. There are some historians have suggested that the biblical apple in the Garden of Eden was actually an orange, so that idea has sometimes been offered. But I mean, in general, it is likely that the big orange orchard would have been established in the Mediterranean in places like Spain, and by no means exclusively in kind of sacred contexts or monastic contexts. But in more northerly parts of Europe, any trees that would have been grown would have needed to be sheltered, especially during the winter, brought indoors, grown in sheltered, even covered spaces. And it's likely that those kinds of settings those kinds of experiments in cultivation are likely to have first started in places like monastic gardens. And then certainly subsequent to that, in the late medieval period in Northern Europe, it's quite common for castles and the elites to set up orangeries and indoor places to grow citrus fruits in pots so that they can be kept indoors through the...
I saw this kind of potted orange plant in a painting, actually, fittingly, I suppose, of William of Orange, done in 1654. And it shows him standing next to a potted orange plant with orange fruits ripe on the tree. Is that kind of potted orange growing, is that the way that they grew oranges in Shakespeare's lifetime? I mean, I would expect that they couldn't have planted orange orchards in England, not the way they did in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, it's very likely that any orange plants or citrus trees that Shakespeare would have seen or Shakespeare's contemporaries in England would have been in pots, exactly like that. And it was very common for aristocratic households and castles to have potted oranges and orangeries and things. That's where that French word comes from, which is oranges in pots, so they can be grown outdoors in the summer, but then brought into indoors through the winter at night to survive the frost. So that would have been quite common as a kind of elite practice. And so it's, I suppose, fitting that William of Orange was associated with that. Of course, it also fits with his name and the puns on the name which ultimately gives it the national color to the Netherlands, right? And the Dutch football team wears orange jerseys because of that.
Another 16th century painting called The Well-Stocked Kitchen by, I'm going to try my best at his name here, Joachim Buchelaer. Lemons and oranges are depicted in this painting with olives down in the lower right. But this is a table of what appears to be an average English housewife, or certainly not, castle level cooking here. This was sort of an ordinary life painting. And I wondered if citrus fruits were considered a kitchen staple for the average cook.
I think they probably were, but certainly not year round and not for every meal. But I think they would have been readily available. We know from written sources that by the 14th century, oranges were readily available in the markets of Paris. English customs documents indicate that they're being imported into England as early as 1420. So we can expect them to be occurring in the market so that they're available generally. And where we have early recipes, and I'm by no means an expert on them, but those which I've had a chance to have a look at, it's clear that fresh orange juice and fresh lemon juice does sometimes feature. So I would give an example of a sauce for chicken, which is recorded in a book called Markham's Country Contentments, or The English Housewife, which was published in 1615, and its sauce for chicken calls for both fresh orange and lemon juice. So these would have been available.
So even if you weren't growing them, you had access to them at the markets or various places.
But something to keep in mind is that these things would have been highly seasonal, right? So the season in which they didn't have refrigerated trucks and shipping, schedules and things like that, and like our normal global supply chain. So the main season when citrus fruits in Spain would have been coming into fruit would have been in the winter months, probably starting around December and around Christmas and going for a few months after that. So most of the year, probably from April or May through to November, fresh fruits would not have been available. On the other hand, citrus rinds can be dried. And it's quite clear that if you look at these early Tudor period cookbooks, orange rind and lemon rind are quite common in lots of recipes, especially for sweets, in glazes, in minced pies, and so forth. So it's quite likely I would have thought that dried citrus peel would have been very much a kitchen staple, because those would be available throughout the year. The other thing I'd note about that painting that you mentioned, of course, it also has olives in it. Olives also are Mediterranean, wouldn't have grown in Britain, and are also highly seasonal. If you're getting fresh olives, again, they're mainly an autumn harvest. Now, they can be made available year-round if you pickle them in brine and transport them in jars in salt, as we all know.
That's how I eat them today.
That's how many of us eat them today, and that would have been available then too. But if in this painting they're kind of being shown as more fresh, that also suggests a kind of seasonality that's focused on that kind of winter period, perhaps.
In Coriolanus, which is set in Italy, where these Mediterranean fruits like oranges and olives were sourced, as you say, Shakespeare has a character refer to the phrase hearing a cause between an orange wife and a faucet seller. Now, this phrase orange wife is confusing to me. Can you explain for us what is an orange wife?
I think in this case, we're talking about a woman selling oranges. So an orange seller.
Okay. Like at a market, or just like this is her job?
I would assume at a market. So I think that, wife in Shakespeare, in Shakespeare's time, could sometimes be used in the more general sense of a woman. It's not necessarily like a husband and wife.
Okay.
This sounds to me like a reference to a kind of argument in a marketplace in Italy between a woman who's selling oranges and a faucet seller. And a faucet seller is a man who sells the spigots probably for wine barrels, right? They didn't have sinks. So these are faucets that you stick in your wine barrel for decanting wine. I would see it as somehow giving a kind of Mediterranean color, because of course wine barrels and people who make faucets for wine barrels are only going to be found in wine producing countries like Italy. And if you're going to have fresh citrus juice being sold locally by women, it's also likely to be in a setting like that, rather than a kind of more upscale marketplace in London. So it gives it a kind of bit of a Mediterranean market feel. Another
orange reference in Shakespeare's plays comes from Shakespeare's Winter's Tale, and the characters Autoclytus and Mopsa go back and forth with one another in what's a very funny exchange. But at one point, Mopsa uses the phrase talking about going to the orange, as if orange is a place that you can go to. What was the orange, and what did somebody do there? I think in this case, the reference is probably to an orange house or an orangerie. So someone is going to the orange because it's a kind of upscale garden building, not a greenhouse as such, but something similar in that direction. And what's interesting in this case is that is something that, as we've talked about earlier, would have represent part of a wealthy household, a place of leisure for an aristocratic household. And of course, in that same exchange, it's contrasted with going to the mill, right, which is a place of drudgery for the preparation of flour from wheat, which is very much the food of the masses. So it is a kind of play upon a contrast between going to a place of leisure for the wealthy and a place of drudgery for the more kind of common folk or the poor. And my recollection of that whole sort of scene in The Winter's Tale is there's a lot of play on characters being in poverty or being wealthy. Well, we've discussed oranges being something of a status symbol, as well as popular items for cooking with and using the juice and even selling them at markets. But there's one record from 1554 where the medical doctor Dorian wrote that oranges and lemons have medicinal benefit. And we know about this from colonial American history because they were often carried on ships to help prevent scurvy. But some 15th century paintings depict doctors seeming to recommend oranges to patients. So, Dorian, were oranges considered medicinal?
Yes, definitely. And their recognition as a kind of medicinal plant species in Europe goes back to the classical period. So Dioscorides, who was a Greek doctor in the Roman period in the 1st century AD, is famous for writing a 5-volume treatise on materia medica, on things that could be used for medicine. And it includes references to use of both citrons and lemons. And of course, the uses of medicinal plants has widespread uses in other regions as well. So if you go to traditional Chinese medicine or ancient Ayurvedic practices in India, citrus rinds often feature as part of the medicinal mix. And so it may well be that even the spread of citrus fruits brought certain, ideas about their medical uses with them as early as when they spread to the Mediterranean in the Persian or the Roman period. So I think that those traditions are very, very ancient. And of course, it is true that they can prevent scurvy. They, have other health benefits as a source of vitamins, but often these medicinal plants in the past were used for lots of other ailments that they may or may not have actually treated.
I know we would love to explore the history of oranges in Shakespeare's lifetime. What are some of your favorite books or resources you can recommend we use to learn more?
Okay, so I would recommend a couple of places to start. So on citrus fruits, there's a recent volume of collected papers called Argumed, Archaeology and History of Citrus Fruit in the Mediterranean. And it was published by a French research center in Italy who kindly made it available as an ebook for free. And it's based on a meeting of historians, geneticists, archaeologists, including myself, which was held at ancient Pompeii in 2014. So it's fairly up to date on the early history and archaeology of citrus fruits. And it looks at them from Southeast Asia through to Israel and the Persian world, through the Roman world, through to medieval France and the Netherlands and so forth. So it's got a wide range of sources on the fruit. Another nice place to start would be a book on Tudor period cooking and recipes. And there are many books on Tudor recipes, but one that I think is a nice starting place is something called The Tudor Kitchen by Terry Beaverton, which I think is first published in 2015. And it makes a good starting place because it combines historical discussion with a selection of actual recipes of that period.
Those are great resources. We'll be sure to link to both of these as well as where you can learn more about Dorian in the show notes for today's episode. So make sure that you check there for those. Dorian, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible. So your choice would be in addition to those.
This is a tough one. I suppose it depends on whether I thought I was really going to just be stuck there for eternity, or I might be there hoping to be rescued after some time. I mean, I think if I were really thought I would be stuck there, I would be looking for some additional entertainment. And I'm a great fan of various modern poets, and I would probably take the collected poems of Wallace Stevens, which has long poems and short lyrical, quite entertaining, funny poems as well. It would be a kind of nice complement to Shakespeare. If I was thinking that I might be there a long time, but with the hope of being rescued after a few years with some future career, I might take something with a bit more of a scientific adventure story, actually, which would be nonfiction, something such as Alfred Russel Wallace's Malay Archipelago or Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle, both of which are wonderfully written stories of early scientific explorers kind of discovering both the natural and cultural world.
Those are excellent choices for sure. You'd be well set up on your deserted island. Dorian Fuller, thank you so much for being here and discussing the history of oranges here with us this week. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
When you want to explore a historical topic further, it's helpful to have a guide for where to start. And that's why we pack the show notes full of archival images, research articles, and book ideas you can use when you want to learn more. To find those resources and learn more about Dorian, please check out the show notes for today's episode at CassidyCash.com/episode 115. That's CassidyCash.com/EP155. How would you like to see the video of this week's interview? You can watch this interview as well as other exclusive interviews not available anywhere else right inside That Shakespeare Life app. That's right, That Shakespeare Life is now streaming on our very own digital app. We are very excited to make this available, and not only can you stream podcast episodes anywhere you go, but the app contains exclusive content like activities, games, documentary shorts, expert interviews, and animated plays, all free from ads and available anywhere you might be. You can learn Shakespeare's history from the experts who know him best while you're in the carpool line, cooking dinner, or even while you're working out. Take Shakespeare history with you wherever you go, all without any commercials. Download the app now at CassidyCash.com/experience. That's CassidyCash.com/experience. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.